Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. My name's Nick, I'm from Victual. I'm hoping today can be valuable for you and guide some perhaps safety thought and perhaps provoke need for improvement or just an assessment of what you're doing in your brewery. So let's get, in terms of the agenda, we're going to do a bit of an overview of the industry and look at WHS framework in Australia, and let's get an understanding of the broad risks that you as brewers face, what due diligence means, and then trying to get an understanding of, with regard to safety, how far you're actually meant to go in achieving that. And also then, okay, well, what does that mean then? Now that I know that, what do you think you need to do from here? So hopefully it's a really prompting session that gets you thinking. So got 20 minutes to race through it, and there's a fair bit there, but let's keep focused on safety in your brewery. So look, Victual are a risk management firm solely focused on food and beverage. Certainly look at production right through to venues, and it's pretty broad ranging. So a lot of the solutions that we do for food and beverage associations can involve things like product recall, fire engineering, insurance placements, safety, plant risk assessments, and HACCP. So our involvement has so far been with the Independent Brewers Association, developing a safety solution which is called IBASafe. And what I'm going to do today is really share some of those learnings that we've come to know through the program, but also try to share them so you can be more informed to make decisions in your brewery. So look, the reality is that legislation is there to guide good practice. It's compliance, it's not, and governance sits above that. But if you don't be compliant, then some of the impacts can be severe enough to really shut doors on breweries. So it's, I'm sure that you all take it seriously, but I just want to give you some detail about what that means and why that's so important. So it's when you look to become a brewer or start up a brewery or join a brewery that's existing, usually it's to the freedom to do what you love and producing good beer for people. And that's a lot of what I've heard in our time in the last 18 months. It's not really to become a safety expert, and that's certainly where some expert advice has allowed us to get across the critical risks, understand the exposures to things like working at heights, chemical handling, manual handling, and process safety. So things like CIP and with regards to milling in, things like that, around racking and forklift and logistics certainly as well. So really critical risks, and if not managed properly, this can be really serious. So if you don't take the appropriate action to reduce those risks, there are chances that you can seriously injure people and cause permanent impairment or worse. And there is also that legal obligation that sometimes, if you don't follow it, can be convictions or fines or even loss of business. So that's obviously the adverse impacts that we want to avoid. And to manage it well, I think it's really about understanding what are those severe and critical risks, top 3 to 5 in your brewery, and really get an understanding of how effective you think the controls are. And also, what evidence do you have around those controls? So, you really have to be able to prove how you manage these risks. And if you don't have that evidence, it really, to a regulator or anyone else that's investigating either post-incident or, during an audit or anything like that, you really aren't going to be able to show that you're managing safety. And if you're not managing safety properly, chances are you are in the line for injuring someone or some of those other impacts. So that's not a comfortable space to be in, certainly with some of these risks that we're talking about in terms of combustible dusts or liquids in hazardous areas, plant and equipment around forklift and logistics functions, EPS, confined space, and I think some of the more underrated ones perhaps with front of house public safety, and when you might go to an event or you host a collaborative brew or an event or something like that. And certainly with the National Heavy Vehicle Law that applies to vehicles over 4.5 tonnes. So, you've really got some new requirements as of the law change with that last year. And the old contractor management, electricians, plumbers, the mobile canners or whoever it might be, certainly transport, logistics, these third parties that you really need to be able to demonstrate evidence, and you need to get comfortable that you're looking after them when they're in your brewery. So here's the law, pretty straightforward. The Act is the prescription of what you need to do. You've got a duty, it's a positive one, and it really is a personal responsibility as well. The regulations really just put some meat on the bone of that Act in saying, yes, here's the detail of that duty. And where you get to the codes of practice and the Australian standards, this is where the codes are how-to sort of dummy guides to managing 24 risk categories. There's 24 codes, and the Australian standards are an extension of that says, talks about specifications for products, and also things like machine guarding or electrical wiring, really goes into that detail of how to do it. So that's really what we've built IBASafe on, is to make sure that it's a legally satisfactory tool. And I think there are obligations to brewers in terms of safety. You've got to provide that safe premise. You need to make sure that the measures you've got around plant equipment and chemicals and machinery like forklifts, vessels, etc., are really all coming together in a suitable work environment that is managing risk well. But there is that compulsory obligation to have workers' comp insurance, unless of course you are a sole trader, then you just need to have other types of insurance for yourself. But a couple of the legal obligations there. So here's a couple of legal terms that I think I really want to get your head around to understand who's got duties and how they're meant to execute them. So this PCBU term is really around breweries and other companies. So might be the people that you import your vessels and other equipment from. It could be people that might come in and do your electrical work. So they're people who are conducting businesses or undertakings, or probably could be you. That's the other way to think of it. So all of these people have got duties to their organisations. The people in the PCBU that really make decisions around policy or resourcing or things like that are called officers. So they're the ones that say, yes, we're going to go and do that, or no, we're not. A lot of the time, it's just the owners, or perhaps if in a very small brewery, it could be the owner and the head brewer, or but really understanding that these people are certainly the business leaders, and then everybody else that isn't an officer is a worker, still has responsibilities that are positive and personal, but also includes volunteers that you might have coming in to learn about brewing, or you might have some volunteers on a packing line, these types of things, casuals, contractors, everyone else in between, staff. So they need to make sure that they follow reasonable instruction. They've got a right to say, no, we don't think this is safe, this is how we think it can get better. And everyone needs to consult and work together to make sure that the PCBU is doing their role. Okay, so in terms of the penalties, we've got to make sure that the category 3 is really, yes, okay, there's a breach of law, but there might not be a risk to serious harm. Okay, so category 2 is serious harm or risk of serious harm, but there's no recklessness. Okay, And then category 1 is where someone has caused serious harm and an investigator, like a WorkSafe or a work cover, has come in and said, you've been reckless. And that there is category 1 where, say for example, you've let somebody that you know that isn't forklift licensed or trained to jump on a forklift. They might run over somebody's leg or cause injury to themselves, and you knew that they weren't trained. You let them get on it, and that's the type of thing that could end up in category 1. So that's like, unfortunately, sort of maybe a bit of a reality to say, well, if you are that officer or that worker, you could go to jail, and the corporations and the PCBUs and everyone else, they're those financial risks as well there. So, and also, we don't want to hurt anyone. I think there's a values piece there too. So what do you do now? What should you do? What are the gaps? How do you know those gaps? And then what do you do about filling them? Maybe there's a fair bit there, but what we're talking about really is knowing and understanding the hazards and risks in the brewery. What are your priorities? What are you doing about them? In terms of resourcing and knowing the law, those two there are really heavily linked, because I think you apply resources appropriate to what you know that you need to do. The timely response to hazards, risks, and incidents, you've got to be timely and thorough. Otherwise, you're not fulfilling your duty. So I think the other element is enforcing the brewery's compliance. But compliance to what? If there's no system, well then what are you complying with, aside from, if you're going to have a go at reading the legislation, which no one wants to do. So, and that last one, verify compliance. If there's no evidence, unfortunately, regulators and anyone else that's investigating post-incident, they're going to say, look, there's nothing to prove it here. So unfortunately, that positive duty needs evidence. Okay, so, all right. So look, how far do you need to go? And really, this is the answer around being reasonably practicable. So you really need to make sure that, as you're growing in your business, some of those familiar stories of, look, we just got started, suddenly there's a demand for our beer, you might win an award or secure a few contracts, and suddenly your business is growing and you're going to meet that demand. You might bring people in, and suddenly you're moving next door or to a bigger place, and your story grows. So, or you might have started off big with some investment and really be looking to just evaluate how well you're going. But either way, you've got to have a risk assessed approach. So what do you know? What should you know or ought to know? And then what are you doing about that? So reasonably practicable solutions according to your resources, the nature and scope of your business. It's all got to be proportionate. And that's what we're talking about here, okay? So is the hazard foreseeable? What's the severity of the risk? What do you know to be the solutions? Or if you don't know solutions, who are you asking about what the solution might be? And what would a normal, reasonable person do, knowing what they know, okay? And it does come back to, money and ease of implementation, but that all just goes down to, the reasonable person test. You need to follow the hierarchy of controls. So slapping on a high-vis vest or something like that isn't going to, make people safer. If you follow this process of starting at the top and trying to eliminate or substitute, if not engineer out the problem, then you get into things like training and PPE. So a combination of those things is your answer, and it's really, you just got to get to know it yourself. So in terms of how we get to understand these things, it's really important that you assess them properly. So what we do is really survey people to understand, using these types of examples and criteria, that it's really important to do these things properly and be able to talk to this criteria. Demonstrate those things, and you are hopefully on your way to being diligent. So, sorry, let's skip. Yes, so in terms of, trying to be sure that, you are being diligent, I think it's a piece here around, you know, what is your way of approaching safety? Is there formal systematic evidence and documentation? And then, you know, sometimes, you know, things like IBASafe can provide a way, an approach that, you know, you have subject matter experts doing a bit of a brewery inspection, you know, providing you with a resource in terms of a handbook, and then really much the same as like a personal trainer, I suppose, keeping you accountable to your objectives and on track with what you need to do. And also very much just being your partner in compliance, you know, over a sort of a steady period that allows durability and sustainability. And you know, a lot of the feedback we've had from brewers is, you know, we just can't have an upfront investment. So we've just spread it out over a 2-year program based on your annual literage. So, you know, we've had some really good feedback on that approach from, you know, businesses and but even with the program where we've engaged, you know, staff and spoken to punters and even third parties from logistics and everywhere else, it really is, I think, an effective way of de-risking your brewery and making sure that you've got some assurance there from sometimes what you need an independent third party. So, you know, I think in terms of questions, look, I really wanted to sort of try and hear from those online and try to get an understanding of what you feel might be the needs or what you might like to see in some of these future webinars, because you know, by consulting you as brewers, we get to provide you know, a more accurate service. So if there is anything, please feel free to ask a question now, and then I can answer that. Whilst people may be putting those through, I just thought I'd point out, you know, some of the things we've enjoyed doing is just getting out to, whether it be sort of regional mashups and being able to talk to people on particular risk areas, or you know, popping past and getting familiar with what you do in your brewery, what your risks might be, and you know, really understanding and perhaps just you know, giving some advice and seeing what you might need. So all of those things, I suppose, are the good parts of us in this program, and you know, we've really enjoyed that time. So I just thought a bit of a recap here, and yeah, just wondering if there are any questions. So if there are, we'll just give a few minutes there. Or if there's anything you'd like clarified, feel free to reach out after this. Otherwise, we will be sharing the slide deck here. Hang on, we've got a question, I think. Thanks, sounds like a great program. We've done a lot over the years, but keen always to stay abreast of what's going on. So look, that's fairly typical as well. You know, even some of the larger brewers who are a bit more maybe mature, or the smaller guys that have really put the things together themselves, might just want to review and say, look, this is what we have. You know, how do you think that fares against, you know, current legislation? But in terms of you know, staying abreast, these, you know, it is quite dynamic in terms of safety. Unfortunately, it's never really set in stone. So you know, it is important to stay abreast of those things. So we can definitely help in that regard. So yeah, absolutely. Hang on, sorry, another question here. I'm just going to try and go into it. Just scrolling down. So yeah, so I think as you say, some of the key things here about what about a 2-yearly training that keeps everyone up to date? So one of the things we do is actually have a bit of a training needs analysis certainly, and understand for each brewer or each, it could be a salesperson or venue manager, these types of people who maybe might need some specialised training. Maybe it might be working alone or whatever it might be, but making sure that people have appropriate training, and that's the thing, refreshing things. So hopefully I've nailed that. But how to have two people. So for a while we've been trying to figure out how to have two people standing around when someone is in a tank. Not many. Sorry, it's just for some reason. If I need to, it's just closing that screen. Sorry guys, I'm just trying to read through the. I think it was a question from So, but absolutely. Hopefully I've answered that. If there are any other questions, or if I haven't quite answered that one to your liking, then absolutely just sing out. But yeah, and I suppose that's the other point, for those that have made a conscious effort over the years to stay up to date and do the right thing, just to get that assurance sometimes you might just need a one-off assessment as opposed to kind of jumping right into the whole program. So, we can tailor needs there as well. And certainly, whether it be, there is obviously discounts for IBA members, but if you are not a member, it's still really cheap because, we've discounted it heavily because obviously we're, just looking to engage many brewers around the country. So yeah, we've just maintained that price point to be pretty effective. So yeah, look, I'll send everything out in terms of the slide deck, guys, so that maybe you might want to share that information with your teams about some of the obligations for workers. Or you might want to share it with the officers of the business and say, hey guys, I was on this webinar, did you know about this? So you can hopefully get some more out of it. But yeah, look, thanks very much, guys, and hopefully chat to you shortly. If there's anything else, I'll stand by for another minute or two, just to see if there are other questions which might pop up. Can you give an indicative price range for an initial review and setup assessment? Yes, so assessment steps. So sometimes if people like larger brewers might not have wanted to do the program, they just want a gap analysis. We just put that together for an hourly rate, and really it kind of means sort of a day on site, which is the engagement with workers, getting around the price. But I suppose some of those prices, can be, roughly sort of, maybe 2,500, I suppose. Sometimes just to put a very rough, depending on the size of your brewery. I think from the person that's asked that question, I think it's a larger brewery, to my understanding. So, I think that would probably be fairly well accurate there. But absolutely happy to take that one offline and give you an actual proper indication. Hopefully that's answered that question. And sorry for the last few minutes, guys. My 3-year-old has just woken up. My apologies. Beauty of working at home. But look, thank you very much for your attendance there. I don't think there's any other questions coming through. There's still 2 people online, but look, I think, sorry, I've just actually had a good idea of that Okay, so I'm just going back to one of the questions. Yeah, okay. Yeah, two yearly training that keeps everyone up to date. Yeah, look, I think if you just wanted some training, you know, there's online training. There's 27 modules of that that we give access to, and you know, there's lots of actual training modules for things like forklift and you know, manual handling, etc. Got some really good tools there, but you know, face-to-face is obviously really valuable, and sometimes, like you say, just might need every 2 years to go through a refresher. So yeah, that's absolutely possible and can be part of the program. All right, guys. Well, look, thank you very much for joining. There are a few more webinars, and I'm basically adding to bits and pieces as we go. So look, yeah, thank you very much for your attendance, and hope to either catch up with you in a brewery or the next BrewCon or wherever that might be. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Okay, thanks, guys. Bye-bye.